Welcome once again to Global Civics Roundtables. In this episode, we're dealing with immigration, a huge looming issue on the national stage, not so much here in Montana. In the conversation we're about to join, two individuals are engaged in different ways in dealing with problems that immigrants and refugees have in this part of the country. Jessica Marks is spearheading an endeavor called Refugee Center Online. Shahed Haq Hasrath is an immigration lawyer. He founded the border crossing law firm and serves as the president of the board of directors for the Montana Immigrant Justice Alliance, a statewide nonprofit working for immigrants' rights.
So we have a board of directors, including a whole bunch of people who have been active on the issue of immigration over the years. Several Latino immigrants, people who have various interests in immigration. So we have an English language instructor as one of our board members, and several of our board members have had experiences with immigration coming to the United States themselves or with close family members, and so it's pretty much I'm the president of the organization, and we have 11 other board members.
Yeah. And would your organization, Jessica, be a party to this or an observer?
We're a separate organization, although we have kind of mutual interest and intend to work together on some issues. Yeah. Our organization, our board members are all over the country. A couple local board members in Helena, but our board includes resettled refugees and then different people who are affiliated with refugee resettlement.
Yeah. Well, let's start with real general sense of how immigration is going in Montana. I mean, I think it's fair to say Montanans aren't always thinking about immigration in the same way that people living close to the other border, our southern border. Here we are on the border with Canada, and conceivably there would be a lot of matters involving transboundary traffic and people crossing it, but we don't hear very much about it. There's not much controversy in this part of the world compared to what's going on the Texas-Mexico border and the other southwestern states. But tell us, you can both kind of join in this, the terminology that we should be using. People are often using illegal alien, undocumented person, illegal immigrant. People don't talk much about legal immigrants. The conversations tend to steer toward the problems. So give us a little coaching on the way to speak about this issue correctly, using the right terms. We'll go from there.
Well, I use the terms as far as referring to anyone who might be here without legal status. The term undocumented alien or undocumented immigrant or unauthorized immigrant, I think, are more accurate terms to use than what we hear a lot is illegal alien. And one of the basic reasons why undocumented alien is really more accurate and not as pejorative is simply because it more accurately characterizes somebody's status as being here in the country. They don't have the correct papers. They don't have the document that would allow them to be here legally. They're undocumented. But illegal alien, the reason why I don't use that term is because alien simply means non-citizen. Alien is a term that is defined in the Immigration and Nationality Act. But illegal alien is not a defined term. You wouldn't say illegal citizen as referring to a citizen in any capacity. By the same token, you wouldn't say illegal non-citizen or illegal alien, because a human being is never illegal. Somebody's status may be illegal. They may not have the right documents, but no human being can be illegal. And that's what Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Prize winner and Holocaust survivor, very famously said: no human being is illegal. And that's why illegal alien just is a offensive term, and I avoid it.
Yeah. And a certain class or type of immigrant would be a refugee. Technically, how does one become classified as a refugee?
Right, so a refugee is a legal term. So like you said, it's a class of an immigrant. And a refugee is somebody that's defined by the United Nations who has fled their home country and they've crossed over a border. So they've had to cross an international border. And they fled for a particular reason. So persecution, or it could be fear of persecution, meaning that nothing has happened yet, but there's good evidence that it could, based on their ethnicity, their group membership, their political views, or their religion. So there's a very specific legal class that defines a refugee. There's also, a couple other terms within that people sometimes are confused. So there are asylum seekers. So that means somebody who has arrived in the United States, if we're talking about in our country, and has not actually been identified as a refugee, but has fled their home country and is now trying to seek asylum. Or an asylee, somebody who has actually received asylum in the United States.
Yeah. And a person seeking asylum is asking for the protection of the state that they're in now, the United States. And if not granted asylum, then that person is subject to deportation. They can be sent home, and by definition, that's a dangerous thing to happen to such a person, because they fled for a very serious reason. They're going to be in trouble if they go home.
Right.
So do you, in your law firm and within the alliance that you work with, do you deal with refugees and provide the legal services required to establish asylum?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have, over the years, come to represent quite a few asylum seekers and have won, at this point, almost 20 cases for asylum seekers. So represented clients in about 20 cases where they've been granted asylum. So it's a difficult form of relief to win, there's no doubt about it. The strange thing, and I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between what people might think should constitute a refugee or asylum seeker, and sometimes our laws are a little bit more restrictive than someone might imagine. There are burdens like a 1-year filing deadline that are imposed. In other words, if you come to the United States, typically you're required to have applied for asylum within 1 year of arrival. There are reasons why sometimes people won't do that, and sometimes there are exceptions, but the general rule is you have to file within 1 year of arrival. And there are other things. For instance, sometimes people might fear persecution or death or torture in their home country, but it may not very easily fit into one of those categories. It might not be because of their race, religion, or ethnicity. It might be because of their particular social group or their social situation. And in those situations, case law has been a little bit tough. For instance, people fleeing gang violence, the courts have been reluctant to categorize that as being an asylum claim. Sometimes the courts have said, well, gang violence is general crime or general lawlessness, but you've got to prove that you're fleeing a state action, that the government was involved, or that the government could not or would not control these other actors. And then, even then, what is your social group? And so it's difficult for those fleeing gang violence, and it's sometimes the courts can be very restrictive on those, more than you'd think.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because as we speak, the biggest issue in the media in the United States today are children who are fleeing what they claim to be primarily gang violence in their home countries and of Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. And there's a policy change afoot that would enable those children to make claim for status in their home country before they make this dangerous trip north through Mexico to the United States, only to be received and then deported or served with papers and going through a difficult process. And the media reports today, now things may change by the time people see this program, but there's already consternation about that particular phrase, the membership in a particular social group, and whether or not, as you say, gangs, being members or disaffected members or victims of gangs, that may or may not be legally sufficient for them to make these claims stick. Changing the subject a little bit, you've both dealt with refugees in your respective methodologies. You are providing online services so that well, you tell us, how does a refugee
Sure. Yeah, the Refugee Center online.
Center online. How does it work?
Sure. So we're literally an online education and community center, meaning that we offer programs that are all somehow online, but range in a variety of things. So things like online classes, similar to what you might have at the university level if you were doing distance learning. So you could take an online citizenship class through our center. After you've been in the U.S. 5 years, you can apply to become a U.S. citizen. So this program can help refugees learn sort of the civics and historical background that they need in order to pass the citizenship and process. But then we also have other features that are more kind of a community center where we're trying to build a network of refugees. We target refugees who are in sort of non-traditional locations. So historically, since our refugee resettlement program started in the 70s, about 95% of refugees have been resettled in urban, meaning larger, often port city locations. But within the past 10 years, there's interestingly some demographics of refugees moving to more not rural, but smaller communities, and even some rural. But so we are focusing on refugees in those areas, especially who might have less access to traditional services. So places like Billings, Montana, actually, or Lewiston, Idaho, or Fort Morgan, Colorado. So smaller communities where they can, through our center, they can connect with other refugees and share their experiences and insights and knowledge that they already have.
Yeah. Here in Montana, can you just give a few examples of where your clients would be from? They're refugees from someplace. Is there a pattern, a country of origin where most of your clients might come from, or is it a scattering from all kinds of places, troubled places in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you look at just within the past 5 years, you can kind of almost guess where most refugee sending countries are, right? So a lot of countries in the Middle East, places where there's huge amounts of conflict. So Iraq, Afghanistan, currently Syria, there's over 2 million refugees have fled Syria. So for us as an organization, it's typically about maybe a 5-year trail of going back of what refugees are going to be serving the most. So Montana, actually, after the Vietnam War, settled quite a few refugees in the Flathead area and in Missoula. So there's actually a little bit sort of remnants of that still in Missoula. There's a big Hmong population, and there's an organization there. And then we in Montana have dealt with just sort of smaller pockets of groups. There's some refugees from Burma, there's a few from Iraq, there's some from Liberia. So there's definitely smaller groups of refugees that you might not even know about.
Yeah, you mentioned the Hmong people, which is a tribal affiliation, a group of people from Cambodia and Laos. And they were brought here under a program, but
exactly.
led by veterans of the Vietnam War. And I think that pattern has been repeated in other parts of the country. There was sort of a debt to be paid to some of these people who helped the United States during that war and then were left behind, which is also the case, as we know now, in Iraq.
Exactly.
Big
so the
time.
same thing.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
A lot of issues of interpreters and people who actually had even been told that they were going to be able to come to the United States, and now there's a huge lag in that happening.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just going to say just some of the countries where I've applied for and won asylum for some of my clients were Pakistan, Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, Ivory Coast. Let's see, I had one from Thailand, and I recently had one from Mexico. So we won that one.
Yeah.
That was a domestic violence asylum claim, which is kind of a new area of law. It's something previously thought foreclosed from asylum seekers, but she was a Mexican woman who had to flee from her husband in Mexico, who was very severely torturing and abusing her, and she sought out the assistance of the Mexican government and was rebuffed and rejected, and she ultimately fled the country. It was many years ago, so she had multiple issues there. One was that she only applied for asylum, almost 7 or 8 years after she entered the United States. Another one is that she's from Mexico, a country where we don't necessarily think of Mexico as being a place where the government wouldn't recognize or support a legitimate claim, but there are a lot of issues with domestic violence there, and the claim in that case was a social group claim, and the particular social group are women who are unable to leave their relationship and are unable to get away from the abuse. And in her case, it was a very clear PTSD as far as her inability to even discuss the issue was her PTSD prevented that, and it was only when she sought out medical treatment that she started to be able to open up and then ultimately apply for asylum. And we won that one just a few months ago. So that was quite a unique one.
Yeah. Well, when you say you won, I mean, in both your cases, you're not dealing with a legal process, but you are. But you're both involved with helping people adjust and get justice.
Oh, this was a legal process. She was in immigration court to be deported. Yeah.
I mean, what I'm getting at is that this must be gratifying work. It sounds very challenging in different ways in both fields of work that you're engaged in. So, what motivated you early on to involve yourself? You first. You know, what got you into this line of work? It's a fairly narrow field in Montana, just because of our geographic isolation, relative isolation, and I know you've served a lot of people in recent years. How did you get started? What motivated you to pick immigration law?
Well, you know, I went to law school in Chicago, and pretty early on I just got involved with an organization called the National Immigrant Justice Center, and in Chicago it's a major port of entry. A lot of people arrive for the first time using a tourist visa or maybe even a fake visa and present themselves at the port of entry and ask for asylum. And there's a lot of that in Chicago. And so there was a need for such a need that even law students were allowed to take on these asylum cases, run with them, interview, develop the application and everything. So I ended up doing maybe 4 or 5 of those types of things while I was still in law school before I'd even graduated, and won asylum for 4 or 5 people. And then, I just found it to be rewarding, and I really recognized that no matter how legitimate the claim for asylum, the level of scrutiny that these applications are placed under, any dates that you've gotten wrong, anything that you don't remember with pinpoint accuracy can be used against you to supposedly show discrepancies or the fact that you're not being credible. Even though
often you might have PTSD or these other severe issues.
And so that's where, an attorney can really help and make a difference. And so I just kind of built my career from that premise, and then I expanded it from just asylum and refugee work to assisting some of those refugees with getting their green cards and their citizenship. And then I just decided I wanted to do that for everyone, whether you originally came in as a refugee or whether you came here just to pursue a better life for your family. The end result is the same. It's about being able to have the freedom to go somewhere better, to start a new life for your family, to raise children in a safe environment. And all of those things really, to me, seem to fit into almost any kind of immigration work that I do. So,
yeah. Well, I think we'll circle back to what you just described. There's some scholarship now, legal scholarship and other social science research, sort of asserting that to migrate is human, and the ability to migrate is on par with a human right. That as sovereign individuals, and families, we should have the right to go from a place to a better place. And there's all kinds of barriers to leaving in some situations, but many more barriers to entering. You can leave most countries, but getting into another can be a tricky operation, as you described. Jessica, what got you involved in creating this, or helping to create this online, kind of unique new service for refugees?
Yeah, so as an undergraduate, I went to Whitman College in Washington, and I studied religion. And for my senior thesis, I did this grant looking at how, when refugees are resettled to the United States, how their religious practice changes. And that's sort of what first got me interested in working with refugees, and sort of going into people's homes and just seeing the incredible resilience and courage of so many people to restart over, especially when they didn't, even in this situation, have a choice. So that's kind of what got me started. And then over the past several years, then I've had a variety of opportunities to work with refugees. In Washington, D.C., I worked with refugees from different parts of Africa, and then I worked on the Thai-Burma border for a little while, working with refugees that had fled from Burma. And actually being in the refugee camps there, I started to see refugees using, solar-powered computers in order to try, even in a camp, to try to stay in touch with their family. And so I started seeing this use of technology, and coming home to the US, when I was looking for services for refugees, all I could find was stuff for people like me, people who wanted to help refugees, and not something that sort of empowered them to be able to find what services they wanted on their own. And so I kind of came up with this idea and have been working with a board and did a big needs assessment before we started to see, is this actually happening, and found over and over refugees are using the internet. And so we went for it.
Yeah. You mentioned the Thai-Burma border. I have found a little bit of information in the state of Montana about immigrants to the state, where they're from, and refugees in particular. And it's sort of astonishing to see actually how few people have come to this state, have been allowed to settle in Montana. And across the board, if you look at the other states, actually in surrounding states, the numbers are way higher. And I don't know what to attribute this to. We're a welcoming society, I think, generally speaking, in Montana. So there must be something more to it than that. But I'm curious to have you share with us your thoughts about why only a few, relatively few, find their way here and find a way to stay here, and why in recent years there's been a surge across the country of refugees from Nepal and then Burma, and so few from places like Syria and Iraq, Sudan, the big places where huge masses of people are being displaced by war and oppression. So this is a long-winded way of just kind of getting at some of the sparsity of numbers and what you would attribute that to. You would know more about that than I can discern from the little bit of information that exists in the state.
Well, I think the numbers are really low. They might be higher than you realize because they're secondary migrants, so people who are resettled to another state and are choosing to come here. So there definitely, are probably a few more than necessarily are showing up in the census or something along those lines. But I will say at the same time, I think Montana could be a really welcoming community for refugees, and we do have a state refugee resettlement program. Up until this point, it's really not been proactive, and I think that, maybe that was because people thought we didn't have the services needed to support refugees, but more and more, I think people are starting to realize we do actually, that, even in Helena or Billings or Missoula, that these communities have actually really extensive social support networks. We have job opportunities. We have things that might be appealing to refugees, and especially refugees who are from more, agricultural backgrounds or different things. They're actually, in upstate New York was the first resettlement to a rural area that was helping train refugees who have come from agricultural backgrounds to go work on dairy farms. So similar type of things could happen in Montana, and I think that we would be able to successfully facilitate refugee resettlement.
Yeah, we have the absorptive capacity to handle more people than
we might realize.
Yes.
I completely agree with Jessica that I think the numbers that may have been collected by our Office of Refugee Resettlement wouldn't quite be accurate. I mean, they're historically, while there's great potential for that office to do a lot more than they have been, their focus has been more on long-standing refugee populations here in Montana, like the Hmong. But I think that with the change of focus to kind of recognize the newer refugee populations that are coming in, and not all of them have made their application for asylum here in Montana, but like Jessica said, traveled here oftentimes for many of the same reasons that everyone comes to Montana. Right. Great place to live, raise a family, quiet, open space, but
safety.
Yeah,
it's a big issue.
Yeah,
but there has been historically, when I've mentioned this to some people, this idea that oh, who would want to live in Montana? We have such cold winters and that kind of thing. But I think that's actually wrong, and I think that it's demonstrably wrong. There are refugee settlements in cold climates. All over the place. There's a lot that would be appealing to the state of Montana, and if we really made that a priority, I think we could do a lot with that. Now, our numbers are never necessarily going to be huge. There's fewer numbers of immigrants in Montana than in almost any other state, but that's because of the size of our population primarily, and there's fewer numbers of everything in Montana than in most states. But but where people go wrong is in thinking that because the numbers are so small, it's almost irrelevant or so small to be marginal and we can ignore it. But even though the populations are relatively small, they're still here. There's a sizable number of people here in all forms of immigration status, ranging from being undocumented to having deferred action for childhood arrivals for people who came here when they were children. I've done dozens of those for people here. They're in a quasi-legal status. There are people here with green cards, many who've been naturalized, and every range of status in between. We have quite a bit of seasonal agricultural workers who come in. It's a very unique thing in the Flathead for just a few weeks out of the year. Agricultural workers come in to primarily for the cherry harvesting season, and they come in, change the entire dynamic of the Polson area for a couple of weeks, and then they're gone. There's a lot to do with immigration here in the state, and like you mentioned at the beginning, we do share a land border with Canada, and much of the state is within 100 miles of a border, which means that it's the range within which U.S. Customs and Border Protection operates, and that's the Border Patrol. And a lot of towns, you'll find that the influence of the Border Patrol is a big cultural issue in these towns. Sometimes there are issues with animosity with Border Patrol, or Border Patrol sticking their neck out and cooperating with local law enforcement to engage in racial profiling and things of that nature. And so there are a lot of issues with immigration in Montana.
And tourism, actually, a Big Sky, a lot of these bigger employees in the state attract seasonal seasonal workers.
Right. I mean, I've experienced that joyfully over the past summers in national parks, and in particular, lots of young people on special visas to work there in the summertime. I'm kind of getting to a last point, and it might take a little while, and we don't have much time. But my sense of things, I read a lot about this. I don't experience it directly, problems with immigrants and refugees. But in the media, it's become such a harsh world, seemingly. I mean, we're a nation of immigrants. We all know that. We grew up with the correct notion that most of the Euro-Americans, in this country migrated from other places seeking a better life, fleeing from oppression. So we have that kind of locked into our civic culture, and yet today, perhaps partly as a consequence of a severe economic recession, partly for other reasons, some religious motivations, and that goes both ways. A lot of religious people are very pro-immigrant, and then others speak ill of immigrants. Anyway, I'm kind of overgeneralizing, but it just seems, and you mentioned that the scrutiny that people undergo with respect to their legal efforts, it seems like that's particularly, why would the emphasis be there? Why aren't we actually more interested in helping get them legal? There's all kinds of talk, in politics about bolstering the border, defending the border. All that said, it seems to me that as a country, we're sort of taking a negative view. People assuming that immigrants cost us more money instead of adding to the purchasing power of the population. Everything seems to be spinning on the negative. So I'd love to get your impressions of where the state of mind right now in Montana, but more generally, and what we might do to turn that around.
I think if we were to gauge the state of mind in Montana, one way that we might objectively do that is in how the Montana public voted when legislative referendum 121 was posed to them. It was on the ballot the same year that President Obama was up for re-election, It was presented in the question, do you want to deny certain state services to, quote, illegal aliens? And that was the terminology used. And the services that would have been denied ranged from infant hearing screenings to crime victim services, to unemployment insurance benefits, licenses to practice trades or professions, and even the ability to attend college. Not even paying full out-of-state tuition, but attendance at all. So 80% of Montanans actually voted in support of that. Now maybe it's because the language wasn't presented clearly and voters weren't told, well, what services, what do you mean? And maybe they simply looked at it and said, well, their understanding of illegal aliens were that they shouldn't be entitled to services. Whatever the case, 80% of Montanans voted for that. But that's just one example of where Montanans' thinking is at. But there is the good news as far as that referendum goes is that we challenged that. Actually, my group, the Montana Immigrant Justice Alliance, challenged it, and I served as the lead attorney. We challenged the statute on constitutional grounds, and just a few weeks ago, Judge Sherlock here in the 1st Judicial District in Helena struck down the vast majority of the law, all except for one minor provision, which was allowed to stand. The rest of the law is stricken as federally preempted. So that law is no longer there, but it is disconcerting, and nobody could quite tell you what to make of that 80% number. Yeah. I certainly hope 80% of Montanans aren't believing that immigrants serve no value or shouldn't be here, but it's some indication of where the thinking is.
Yeah.
In my experiences, I've come to represent over 1,000 immigrants in the state of Montana in terms of direct legal representation, and over 1,000 more in terms of people I've come into contact with and collected information from. And everybody uniformly agrees that Montana is a welcoming state. People are very kind once they've gotten to know you, once they understand your situation. I get calls every single week from people who want to help an undocumented person, and the fact is the immigration laws provide no avenue for them to really help, but they want to help. And so I think really probably what you can chalk it up to is lack of exposure to the culture and differences and that immigrants provide. And once you're exposed to it, you come to welcome it and cherish it. But until you're exposed to it, you may have negative perceptions.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging to know that it really is. And we witness this in other ways when foreign visitors come to visit Montana. I'm always a little fearful as a host. They're from all over the world and places people don't know where that is on the map. But 99% of the time, once people are engaged in a conversation or sharing a meal or just doing something normal, there's a natural affinity that just flowers, and that's a lovely thing to see. And I'm taken aback. I didn't expect that. Just today, in the last couple of days, the mayor of Davenport, Iowa, is just one example of somebody who's trying to create a refugee program in his community. And then the governor of Massachusetts is doing the same thing on a much grander scale. And this may just be the front end of leadership being taken by elected officials. What's disconcerting about these same stories is that their constituents are up in arms about it. So the problem is huge because the perceptions among the large segments of the population are this is a bad thing, immigrants are a bad thing, they're going to bring their problems with them, they're going to be sick, they're going to be gangs, all these things that nobody wants to experience in their familiar community.
Well, I think that's just it, is that people really, there's a lot of perceptions out there that aren't true, like you said. So economically, people think that immigrants take away and cost, money in Medicaid or Medicare or issues. But the reality is when they do research, they find that actually immigrants contribute, even in states like Montana where people say, well, we don't pay a sales tax, so how are they contributing? When they work, there's still taxes being taken out of their paycheck, that's going to Social Security, there's all sorts of ways, financially, which I think is often sort of the fear that people have, the immigrants contribute, as well as just sort of that diversity and being able to celebrate their culture and that richness it provides.
Yeah. We're fast running out of time. We could talk about this at great length, or you could, and I would be happy to listen to so much more. But thank you so much for joining this conversation. This program is about the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and certainly having some knowledge and appreciation for immigrants and immigration policy and immigration law goes right along with our responsibilities as citizens in Montana. And you're mentioning agricultural immigrants in other states. I can just envision that as a possibility here, especially in light of something we haven't addressed yet, which is a rapidly aging population in Montana and other states, where we're actually going to need some young workers, skilled people, to assist us to keep the quality of life is as high as it is here. So thanks once again, and thank you all for watching Global Civics. Our second conversation in the HCTV studio featured a Mexican consular official and a representative from the Montana Chamber of Commerce. As you'll see and hear, immigration issues are intertwined with trade and investment relationships. We'll be talking about foreign workers in the context of the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's complicated, like most things in public policy. Hello and welcome back to Global Civics. With me today at Helena Civic Television is a distinguished diplomat representing Mexico. He's a consul, resident in Boise, Idaho. His name is Guillermo Ordorica.
Yes, sir.
I will call you consul, and to avoid any mispronunciation of your name. And also Mr. Nate Kavanaugh, a senior at Carroll College and an intern with the Montana Chamber of Commerce.
Yep.
We're here to talk about Mexico's relationship with the United States, with a focus, of course, on our relationship here in Montana with all things Mexican, with respect to trade, energy, immigration. Definitely want to address the immigration issue, because that does come up now and then, even so far removed from Mexico. And Nate, I think you have some interests of your own you might want to pursue in the course of our conversation. Mm-hmm. So for starters, Mr. Consul, please tell us a little bit about your position, what you do, and why you're here in Montana.
Thank you, Stephen. Actually, I'm Consul of Mexico for the states of Idaho, Montana, parts of Oregon, and parts of Nevada. It's a huge jurisdiction in which we have at about 250,000 Mexican origin people. And well, it's a huge territory. I offer services of protection, documentation, and promote Mexico as a tourist destination, a nice partner to invest, a safe and beautiful country to go. So, well, this is my best. I'm trying to do my best with a very nice group of people working with me all together, trying also to send this very strong message of something great is happening in Mexico today.
Yeah. Sounds like a great job, actually.
Well, actually, yes.
Diversified and, interesting territory that you have to cover, a lot of miles,
yes.
A lot of topography.
Yeah, it offers us, in this case, it offers me the opportunity to know this beautiful part of the United States, the northwestern part of the United States, which is really great in terms of nature, natural resources. Just driving from Boise to Helena yesterday was amazing. It's great. I am very, very happy here, and I'm just feeling great in this region as a consul.
Yeah. Well, let's start talking a little bit about the immigration issue, which is not a huge one here in Montana. We are physically so far removed from the border, and all the news we get through the media about U.S.-Mexico border problems there, we don't see them, we don't feel them here. But we know there are many, as you say, there are many Mexican Americans and Mexicans among us doing work, doing whatever they do.
Yes.
And from time to time in the legislature, there are proposals to clamp down or be more restrictive in some fashion with respect to all foreign nationals. And the Mexican identity comes up more often than not. So I'd love to hear more about your work in that arena and your perception of our response to Mexican people in this part of the world.
Well, let me tell you, thank you very much, Stephen. Let me tell you first that the presence of Mexico in the United States is important. 32.5 million people, Mexican origin, lives in the United States. That is about 10.3% of your total population. At the same time, 10.3 or 0.5 percentage of the national constituency. So that talks to you about the importance of the Mexican population living in the United States all around the country. We are neighboring countries, We have complementary economies. We are partners through NAFTA. We share values. Our border is a point of encounter. Sometimes it's a point in which we have to work together to solve differences and problems arising from local situations, but it never put in risk the very good relation that we have with the U.S. government as a whole. We are friends. We learn to be friends through negotiations, through the establishment of a very important network of cooperation agreements and institutional channels so that we can work and continue fostering this very good relation, showing the world how well can do two neighboring countries which are also friends and partners through NAFTA.
Yeah. Well, Nate, we're gonna get you into this conversation in just a moment, but you said two things that I just want to elaborate a little bit. We're complementary economies.
Yeah.
It would be great to have you kind of flesh that out and what that means in terms of social interaction and the movement of peoples back and forth across the border. And then a little bit more about NAFTA and perhaps the effect NAFTA has had on migration patterns, employment, and trade and investment as well.
Yes, this is 2014. We are commemorating the 20th anniversary year of NAFTA. Since then, we've been really having a great evolution of the relation between both countries. We have increased our competitiveness. Both markets are closer than ever. We have a trade exchange, $1 million per minute between both economies. We have people moving 1 million crossings a day in both sides, going back and forth, 1 million a day in this border, which is almost 2,000 miles. We have exchanges through NAFTA for both our countries, close to almost $500 billion for a market close to 500 million people. So this is the size of the market. This is the importance of our relation in terms of trade and this complementary economies. Of course, people go back and forth, and I think that we've been doing very well. We know how to do this. We have Mexican population coming here because they are attracted by business, by opportunities for their personal well-being. And at the same time, we are also offering in Mexico conditions for investing. We have today one of the most important aerospace industries in the world. We have probably the most important automobile industry in the Americas. Most of the production chain of U.S. automobiles are made in Mexico. The same as aircrafts. We even have our own aircraft brands. So this is a very complementary process of economies. The labor market goes beyond, of course, the goods themselves. It has proved to be convenient for both countries to share people because are needed here and also there, because it's not just from here, from Mexico to the United States. We have also the other side, people from the United States going to Mexico and increasing this exchange of people and for the benefit of what we have now been calling the knowledge society.
Yes.
We're building a knowledge society in both countries, benefiting from the best of both. Yeah. So yes.
Well, I appreciate hearing that, because typically when people think or talk about or read about labor migration, when they think of Mexicans as migrant laborers, people who are out in the fields or picking this and that or doing very basic things, important things, but I think that image is a bit out of date. You've been describing, a knowledge-based economy with all kinds of sophisticated people transiting the border back and forth, doing business with one another. So it's refreshing to hear, this modern side of the relationship.
Exactly. Well, in this 20th anniversary of NAFTA, we are precisely trying to highlight this perception of how this knowledge society can really increase as a way for increasing the connectivity between our economies, and also as a way for increasing competitiveness of North America as a whole. Yeah. We've been used to say, well, this product is being made in the U.S. made. Mexican made, probably made in Mexico, probably made in the United States, probably made in Canada. That is good. This was probably at the beginning of NAFTA 20 years ago. After NAFTA, we have developed, on the side of it, we have developed a common, we share values, we're democracies, we share free trade, we share the rule of law, we share human rights. And these common values offer us the ground or the platform for continued cooperating. I'm probably not thinking anymore about US made or Mexican made. Why not to think about North American made?
Yeah.
This new brand from North America. So this is probably the tendency. If we see the world, the way it's behaving, international markets, now products are European made, are not anymore made in Czechoslovakia or Spain or whatever. Right. Now it's European made, it's North American made. Yeah. We're just neighbors and we have to continue doing this. And NAFTA has proved to be very effective. And actually we probably recognize NAFTA as one of the most emblematic free trade agreements in the world, a very successful one, which is now moving forward in this new moment of NAFTA 20 years after.
Yeah. Well, Nate, we're glad to have a representative from the Montana Chamber with us here today, also from Carroll College, two important organizations in our community. What brings you to the table? Tell us a little bit about your connection to this important visit.
Okay, well, I am an intern on international trade for the Montana Chamber, and so I just kind of help out with those areas. And we wanted to hear a little bit more about immigration, so I'm glad we touched on that. But another question that the Chamber had was about energy resources. As far as Mexico is developing energy resources, and so is Montana. And so we just kind of wanted to get a perspective on what opportunities or connections you might envision for Montana and Mexico.
Great. Mexico is an oil-producing country since many years, and you know that. We have a huge reputation for producing oil since many years ago. And during the actual administration of President Enrique Peña Nieto, he has, the government has made important reforms, including the energy sector. So now, even though the oil itself is the property of the nation, the exploitation of this oil and the commercialization of this oil, trading of this oil, and the secondary industry, biochemical industry coming from oil, can be now, under certain conditions, can be now is now seen as a way for investing from the private sector. So now we're opening oil industry to the private sector, and making sure that you can do this and in a safe way, and that your investment is going to be safe also in a very important market, which has been, in terms of our economy, a very stable economy during the last 20 years. So yes, we're inviting the investors to go Mexico, to check on the information that we can offer them in the consulate or in our diplomatic representations, to check on our internet sites about all the opportunities that we offer for those people interested in investing in the oil industry in Mexico. Yeah. The same for extraction, production, refinement, biochemicals, whatever. Right. Now we're partnering, and I'm sure that we will run the same risk. We're all running the same risk in a very positive way of investing in something that's going to be a very safe investment.
Yeah. Well, if I can follow up on your question and what your response, Mexico is renowned as an oil exporting country, as is Canada. The United States has, in recent decades, been a net importer of oil and gas. Now, with all kinds of discoveries and new technologies allowing for the recovery of oil and gas we didn't think we could get at before, now we're on the verge, perhaps, of becoming a net exporter of oil and natural gas. In terms of the complementarity of the North American giants, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, do you see increasing competition for the products of Mexico in the American market, or is it more fully integrated as an industry to call it just straightforward nation-to-nation competition?
Well, Steve, I think that we both believe in free trade. And when you talk about free trade, this has to do with competition, a nice and wealthy and healthy competition between interests regarding the oil industry. What's going to happen, I don't know, but I'm sure that opening the oil industry to international markets and to the international investment is going to be good for all of us. It's going to complement the flows of capital between both countries. It's going to complement the investment that Mexican investors can do with foreign investors coming to invest in Mexico. And I think that this is going to be healthy for all of us and will confirm Mexico as an open economy, a competitive economy, and a good partner and a very safe partner to the United States. So I think this is a very important message that we have to send. We are the 14th economy in the world at this moment. We expect to be one of the first 10. I think that in between the 7th and the 10th economy in the world in the next coming years, probably in the next 15 years. We are the 4th economy in the Americas, the third in North America. The United States is our first partner in everything, and for you, the United States, we're your third partner. So the conditions are there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of go and invest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you're describing a relationship that has been getting better and better and better over the last 25 years or so.
As it should be, because
right.
we're not just friends. In many ways, we're cousins, as we say. We are like a little family, with just one difference. When you marry a couple, they have all kinds of chances, even to divorce. But Mexico and the U.S. have all kinds of chances never to divorce. So we have to keep on things working in the good way.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm fond of thinking of the United States being in a gifted position, being neighbor to Canada and Mexico at the same time. I mean, there's just no more secure continental community on the planet, and we like that. Well, you mentioned tourism earlier. That's one of your functions, is to promote Mexico as a tourist destination. Yes. You don't have to try very hard in this part of the world. We're always looking south, in the wintertime, and I've had the good fortune of visiting Mexico. It was fabulous, and I want to go again.
Yes.
But I have another question, one more about immigration, and that is, I know a lot of people who are seriously considering emigrating from the United States to Mexico.
That is true.
Do you encounter that phenomenon, and what's that about?
Well, this is normal. The same as we, Mexico, have the biggest population of Mexicans living abroad in the United States, you Americans have the biggest population living abroad in Mexico. Just in the state of Guanajuato, in San Miguel de Allende, a little town, we have over 1 million people, and most of them are U.S. citizens. And it's a growing population of senior citizens going to Baja California, and all Baja from Tijuana all the way down to Los Cabos. And there's great urban developments in there, golf courses and hospitals in the region. Of course, this is what we call medical tourism is growing in Mexico, because we offer great hospitals, first quality level hospitals, with great doctors at cheaper prices, of course, with medicine available to them. So yes, it's normal to go there. You will find a stable country, a democratic country, a safe country. You will find it you with medical services, and also in terms of tourism and paradise, we offer you with archaeology, music, all biodiverse destinations, sports tourism, traditional beach tourism, whatever you may want, it's in Mexico. Also, we go beyond burritos, of course, or tacos, and we offer you one of the more elaborated and sophisticated cuisines in the world. So UNESCO just declared Mexican food as a world non-tangible heritage. So this is really amazing, and you will find very interesting going to Mexico to eat. Very nice.
Well, I'm going to have to stop you talking about food in Mexico, because I'm getting really hungry just listening to it.
Well, at this time, yes.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for coming to Helena Civic Television and gracing us with your knowledge and expertise. It's a wonderful privilege to have people from foreign countries come to Helena, the capital city of Montana, and tell us what they're doing. The interest in all things international is growing as we speak.
Thank you very much to you, Stephen, and to your auditorium. Thank you very much.
Right.
Mexico is a friendly country. Open gates for all friends as you.
Yeah. It's time again for our celebrated pop quiz. As usual, there are 3 questions, and they're not very difficult. Here goes. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, involves which countries in this spacious continent? Number 2, what distinguishes a refugee from an ordinary immigrant? Third and last question. Are the laws governing immigration status and procedures primarily state or federal? Don't hesitate to let us know how much you know by sending the answers by email. As always, we'll finish this program with just another minute for human rights.
This is Mohammed Arous from Tunisia, and I'm studying Masters of Business Administration and Civics. Today I'm going to talk about the human rights in Tunisia. I think that human rights should be implemented in every country in the world because it is crucial. For example, in my country it's not signed yet, the Declaration of Human Rights is not signed yet, and I think this is like a problematic thing there. So what I'm trying to do when I go back to my country after finishing this program about human rights, that I'm going to establish a camp about human rights and civic engagement in order to raise awareness and to develop the mindset. Because I do believe that it's very important to know about the human rights and just that you know how to apply it. It's very important that you know about your law. It's very important that you know about the human rights in order to be an active and proactive citizen within your country so that you'll be more effective and you know what is your duty and what is your right. The thing here that we have seen a lot of great things about human rights, and I'm really eager to go back to my country and to be more effective there.
To catch the full interview with the Mexican consul as well as other HCTV and TVMT projects, check out our YouTube channel at this address.